Welcome everyone again to this webinar about doing business in Côte d'Ivoire, organized by NABC, the Netherlands African Business Council. My name is Maloe de Reuver. I'm a project manager at NABC and also country representative for Côte d'Ivoire. I will also be the moderator of today's session. For today's webinar, we are joined by some great speakers. We have Her Excellency Mrs. Yvette Daoud, Ambassador of the Kingdom of the Netherlands in Côte d'Ivoire. Welcome, Ms. Daoud. Carole Versteeg, Director of Investment Attraction at CEPICI, the Center for the Promotion of Investments in Côte d'Ivoire. Allart de Winter, a business development and trade consultant with most operations carried out in the commodity sector, cocoa, cashew, and animal feed. And last but not least, Roger Adou, Regional Director at FrieslandCampina. Then without further ado, I would like to start by inviting Her Excellency Mrs. Yvette Daoud to give us some insights about, from the embassy's perspective, about the current situation in Côte d'Ivoire. Your Excellency, Ms. Daoud, how do you see the health and socio-economic situation in Côte d'Ivoire at the moment? And what do you think will be the impact on Dutch business in the country, both on the short as well as on the long term?
Economically, of course, the closure of borders, the closure of Abidjan, of the rest of the country, it has an impact. All these businesses that are closed. So for now, actually, the prediction is that this year will not show the 7.2% growth that was predicted, but 3.6%. This is a loss, which has mainly occurred through exports, industrial agriculture, but you know the numbers all range between 14 to 20% of losses in most sectors. Obviously, accommodation, food service are highly touched by all this, but also financial activities, clearly, because there's less trade. Export, the harbor, of course, receives a lot of cocoa and cashew is the word in English, and that's that they have trouble exporting because everything is closed off. So there is a problem. They have set up a large package of which the government provides 25% for economic aid to certain sectors to buy off cocoa beans from farmers. The total amount of the health package is 250 billion francs CFA. I'm not going to go into details because I think Mrs. Versteeg will do much better at explaining the government packages to support companies. The other thing that everyone, of course, is waiting for is the opening up of the country. Information changes a little bit. Some people say we have reached the peak in Côte d'Ivoire. Some say it's going to be in a week. Well, we'll know in a week, I guess, or two. And based on that, the government will start deciding which measures can be loosened up. But a lot is already, it's not as strict as in Europe in general. And it would be good, of course, if the borders would open up for trade. But we don't know when it is possible. Then the next thing is, I think we have to calculate that this situation is going to last for 1 or 2 years, for sure. Even if things loosen up, I don't think it will completely go back to where we were before Corona. I guess BC is taking a slightly different meaning these days. We also will still have elections late October. The plan is to not postpone unless absolutely necessary, but probably not very long in that case. So that is another thing which makes this a very important year for Côte d'Ivoire. Now, with my embassy team, and we have Raissa Marteau and Bram Bits listening in, I think most of you are familiar with them, so they are also picking up your questions and you can reach out to them. We have looked into our priorities, which are mainly agriculture. It's also transport logistics, it's entrepreneurship, and we're looking into renewable energy. And we think actually these priorities are still very valid in the current time, because we can all see the importance of agriculture, maintaining food production within a country, but also producing the food in such a way that it can last, and that it can be exported. This was a wish also announced by the Vice President when he opened up the Sahara in November, that Côte d'Ivoire wants to be an agriculture exporting country. And I think we can still, within our priorities, cooperate towards that goal. So I don't think this is a time to, as the speaker said, not do business with Côte d'Ivoire. On the contrary, it is, however, a time to see how we can tweak it so it is feasible to do so still, and to reach our common goals. And for now, I'd like to leave it at that.
Okay, thank you very much, Your Excellency. What impact do you think that will have on Dutch companies in Côte d'Ivoire on the long term? Do you think they will have to perhaps adapt their business model?
Most countries are looking into being a little bit more self-reliant. We hear this from all countries, like we shouldn't be dependent for everything to come from outside. We at least have to do something inside the country. It's the same discussion here in the Netherlands. So I think that does offer new opportunities, but what the opportunities are depends, of course, on every business itself.
For now, I would like to move on to Mrs. Versteeg, because I think, Ms. Versteeg, you also have on the same topic quite some interesting points maybe to add. Mrs. Versteeg, you're Director of Investment Promotion at CEPICI, or Investment Attraction or so. Can you already see any differences between the beginning of the year and now?
What are the measurements? What are the activities? What are the decisions that the government has taken to face the pandemic, but also to, I wouldn't say to rescue the economy, but to hold the economy in order to have this positive trend? The measurements are first to support the enterprises, which is what we can see all over the world. Support the enterprises, the middle size enterprises, international enterprises, bigger size enterprises, and SMEs, small, medium enterprises. That is the first measurement. The second measurement is also social, because we believe that if we also take care of the social, on a social way of the people, we will also empower them for consumption. So social measure for vulnerable populations.
Can you give some examples about those extra support, and specifically maybe also what CEPICI is doing?
No, yes, there is a special fund that has been decided by the government. The Prime Minister has announced a special fund for SMEs, for even the informal sector, and also for big enterprises. And these funds will be able to help these enterprises currently now facing economic issues. So it's 100 million CFA for informal sector and 150 million CFA for SMEs and big enterprises. That's for Ivorian enterprises.
Okay, thank you very much. Then next, so while both the Dutch Embassy and CEPICI are working hard to get Dutch companies and investors to Côte d'Ivoire and also supporting them on the ground there. Now let's hear a perspective from a Dutch entrepreneur in the country and also a multinational. Let's start with Allart de Winter. Mr. De Winter, you have worked and lived in Africa for more than 2 decades. You have worked with several multinational companies active in the commodity sector who all started their operations in Africa during the continent's recent acceleration of growth. In Côte d'Ivoire specifically, you work in cocoa, animal feed, and you also recently helped set up perhaps West Africa's most modern hatchery, Poussin-d'Or, which we also had a pleasure to see during our last Dutch trade mission to Côte d'Ivoire in November 2019. Could you give us some insights to how the current developments in the country have affected your different operations, so cocoa and the hatchery, and what measures have you taken in response?
Thank you for having me, Maloe. First of all, at first sight in Ivory Coast, what the ambassador said, things seem normal business-wise for us. Poussin-d'Or, for example, is able to distribute its day-old chicks throughout the country with a special permit. So inland distribution is not a challenge. But because the borders are closed for airplanes, there is a challenge for Poussin-d'Or to get eggs, because day-old chicks are produced from eggs, and the best quality eggs are imported from Holland. And they arrive twice a week by airplane. But now we all know that the airplanes are stranded at Schiphol Airport, so we quickly had to look for an alternative. And we found a solution in North Africa, from where Poussin-d'Or now imports eggs by road, by refrigerated trucks, that it takes 3 days over the road instead of 1 day by flight. It's not that fast, but it still is an adequate solution in order to keep the hatchery running and to keep people working, because the worst thing is to send the people in a producing environment home. Cocoa and cashew is still being exported out of Ivory Coast. That's not the challenge. The ports are operating.
Okay. That's great to hear. Actually, that your business that you've managed to make some changes, and your business is still going quite well, despite all the changes that are happening at the moment. Actually, about that example that you just gave, normally the eggs would be imported by flight from the Netherlands, and now you're doing it by road from Northern Africa. Of course, there's also quite some questions about what the current changes will mean in terms of greening the economy. Is this actually a more green solution, and will you also continue with this when things are back to normal, or will you go back to flying in the day-old chicks from the Netherlands as soon as you can?
Well, the first experience was good. The quality of the eggs was relatively good, so it might be something we'll look at in the long term, or also producing locally. That's, I guess, the next step, to look into producing locally instead of importing the eggs.
Okay, that's good to hear. And so now you're drawing up on your own experience, of course, which is quite good. But last time we spoke, you also mentioned some examples of other companies in Côte d'Ivoire.
Yeah, obviously this is the worst global recession since the Great Depression in 1930. So it's going to affect, it is affecting, and it's going to affect many entrepreneurs and companies. But I'd like to give a few examples of companies that were able to find a creative solution to still survive for the moment. One Spanish chocolate manufacturer that, well, Spain is badly affected, of course, and this chocolate manufacturer had to reduce its capacity, its production capacity. So therefore, it introduced an Ivorian cocoa bean exporter to a Spanish financier, who would then finance the beans in store Europe during 4 months. And then once the factory is ready to take delivery of the cocoa beans, it would now pay the exporter, and the exporter would pay the financier. And this is a way that the Ivorian exporter can still continue to export, while the Spanish manufacturer does not need to default on its contracts, which you don't want, of course. Another example from a Dutch electrical appliance manufacturer, it realized that the distributors in Ivory Coast were facing challenges because they had no cash, because sales of large purchases, more expensive purchases are being postponed by many people. And as a result, these distributors had no cash to pay for containers that were waiting inside the port to be cleared. So therefore, the Dutch company repurchased or refinanced, if you want the stock, put it in a third-party warehouse managed by a third party, and that freed up cash for the distributors in order to continue the operations and clear the containers. So short term, this is the way for them to survive.
Now, maybe a question for Mr. Adou, your regional director at FrieslandCampina. Mr. Adou, how has FrieslandCampina responded to the recent changes in the country, and how the health and economic situation will affect the company goals that were set for this year?
As you know, FrieslandCampina's job is to provide good nutrition for African families, and that's what we have been trying to do even into this unusual time. We've been affected, as all of my predecessors have said, heavily. First of all, with our people, okay, because one of our key priority when this crisis started was to have our people stay safe. And thereafter, our mission was also to continue to provide that nutrition to all of our customers or all of our consumers. And this wasn't that easy. And we're trying to continue to do primary mission throughout this difficult period, because as the ambassador was mentioning, we had the curfew. Most of the stores have now closed, so we have to be very inventive and to redefine, our way of working. So it's not been easy, and we're trying at least to continue our mission to provide that nutrition. We've done 3 scenarios at the beginning of the crisis, one out of which the situation will last up 3 months. The second one, 6 months. And the third one, which was the worst case scenario for us, was one year, okay? Most probably we think that we're going into the second scenario, whereas we'll be affected heavily into the 6 months. And then we expect the economy to reopen. But there will be a post-COVID situation, which is definitely going to be very different from what we've known so far. Crisis revealed the inventivity of people. So, well, we were obliged to go directly to our consumers. So right now we've set up, a direct to consumers channel. It's working pretty well. And even, right now, we are in the consumer product business, okay? Right now, this is Ramadan, which is a very good period for consumption for food and dairy products. So, for instance, we're using that direct-to-consumer channel, okay, to continue to deliver, and it's working pretty well at the moment.
Other question was about the 3 scenarios you mentioned, with the worst case scenario being 1 year being affected by this crisis. Are you then talking about 1 year of the shops being closed, or about the economic crisis? Because as the other speakers already mentioned, also Her Excellency Yvette Daoud, it might last for quite a long time, perhaps more than a year.
No, for the consequences, I'm pretty confident that the economy will bounce back quite quickly if it's set up. For Côte d'Ivoire, we've got a particular situation with the presidential election, okay? And as I think one of my predecessors was saying, Côte d'Ivoire has always shown a great resilience in terms of bouncing back every time that a crisis has occurred. So I'm not that worried about us coming back into business. For sure, it's going to be different, okay? But what I was mentioning was much more about having maybe a longer lockdown period, okay? Which is something that we also we also foresaw. And for now, we don't think that is going to happen.
So from the side of NABC, we can do nothing more than echo also the optimism and the positivity of the speakers in this session. Very grateful to have you all here and hear your insights. So we've now come to the end of this session. I would like to thank again all speakers, Mr. De Winter, Mr. Adou, Mrs. Versteeg, and Your Excellency Yvette Daoud for participating. All participants as well, thank you for your contributions. And as I mentioned at the start of this webinar, a recording will be made available via our social media channels. Also, as a country representative for Côte d'Ivoire at NABC, I will also be available to help you with any question you may have regarding the country and in supporting your business activities. So feel free to reach out to me. My contact details are on the NABC website. So thank you again, everyone. And yeah, stay in touch and have a great day.